At the outset, I would like to thank the Social Science Forum, Tamil Nadu, for inviting me to deliver this address on championing human equality, scientific evidence, and legal pathways to social justice. Perhaps a few prefatory words as to why I chose this topic would be in order. As most of you know, I have not been a beneficiary of reservations, as I do not belong to the SC, ST or the OBCs. But you do not have to belong to a community to realize that an injustice has been done to that community. You just need your heart to be in the right place. Most of the people who fought for the liberation for the abolition of black slavery in America in the 19th century were whites. Shahu Maharaj, Prince of Kolhapur, Krishna Raja Wadayar IV, Maharaja of Mysore, and VP Singh of a royal lineage did as much for the cause of social justice as, say, Dr. Ambedkar and Thandai Periyar, though their contributions have not been given due recognition. My belonging to a so-called upper caste has conferred on me one advantage. I am privy to what they say and discuss among themselves in private. Most of them, some good human beings but misguided or brainwashed, genuinely seem to think that they are superior to the members of the SC, ST or the OBC, and that they are deserved winners in a Darwinian struggle of survival of the fittest. I used to get into frequent arguments and verbal fights with my relatives and upper caste friends over this issue. So this gave me the idea that perhaps I should put all my thoughts in order and give a talk on the case for social justice from the historical, sociological, scientific, and legal points of view. Let me clarify that my purpose in giving this talk has nothing to do with politics. This is purely academic, even though at the end of my talk, I give some clear action plans with some practical solutions. The topic is vast and the time is limited, so I've left out things which I think most of you would know, such as the history of the social justice movement in Tamil Nadu or the contributions of Thandai Periyar. I am focusing on those issues which are less known but equally important and equally interesting, especially the scientific arguments for human equality. Now let me begin with a quotation from George Bernard Shaw. He says, "Patriotism is your conviction that your country is superior to all others because you were born in it." Now, as you know, the nation into which you are born is an accident of birth. But still we all seem to think that our country is the greatest. Now this can be extrapolated to other things. People think that their religion is the greatest. People think that their caste is the greatest. People think their language is the greatest. People think that their state is the greatest. For no reason other than that, they were born into it. We all know that this is an accident of birth, but we have been brainwashed or made to believe that our caste, our religion, our language is the greatest. Now there is a important concept called tribalism, which you must all know. Tribalism is a way of thinking and behaving in which people passionately favor members of their in-group and discriminate against members of out-groups. As you know, anatomically modern human beings or Homo sapiens originated in Africa about 3 lakh years ago. For 2,90,000 years, we lived as tribes in small groups of 50 or 100. Only in the last 10,000 years, we are leading a settled existence. So when you lived as tribes, you're always suspicious about other tribes, others. You think they've come to steal or pillage or whatever. So both by evolution and by culture, this feeling of tribalism is deeply ingrained in our psyche. That is, we favor members of our in-group and we discriminate against members of the out-groups. Tribalism, don't think tribalism refers only to tribals. No, it's a broader term, an omnibus term, that encompasses casteism, racism, communalism, linguistic fanaticism, regionalism, nationalism, and your fervent support for your political party or sports team. Tribalism is the default state of human societies. My point here is, we must recognize that tribalism is a problem. If the state doesn't interfere, people are going to support members of their own caste or own religion or own whatever, and discriminate against members of other castes, other religions, other whatever. This is a given. So we must decide. You can't gloss over it and say that, you may say that I'm generalizing too much. No, I know that there are a few exceptions. I know that there are people who can rise above the tribalism. But this is not they are very few. The few exceptions only prove the rule. Okay. Now let me give a few examples. A well-known example. I don't know how many of you have heard of this gentleman, Sir Henry Pottinger. He was the governor of Madras Presidency between 1848 and 1854. He was the first to notice that the collectorates, which were the key offices those days, were full of members of one community. I don't have to tell you which community is that. In 1851, he asked the Board of Revenue to issue an order saying there should be diversity in the composition of the collectorate employees. And in 1853, the Board of Revenue found that in Nellore collectorate, there were some 50 employees, all 50 belonging to the Brahmin caste, Telugu Brahmins, and all 50 belonging to the same family, not even another family. And the patriarch of this was a chap called Gotur Venkatramanaya. It is interesting to see if descendants of that fellow are still working in Nellore collectorate. I won't be surprised if they still are. But the point is, in 1853, all 50 members of Nellore collectorate belonged to one caste, and they were members of one family. Tribalism at work, as I said. Now the governor got pissed off and he said, what the hell, I issued an order in 1851 and still things are like this. Then once again, another order is issued in 1861 saying that there are two Huzur Sarishtadas in the collectorate, at least one should be a non-Brahmin. But still, till date, the ghost of Gotur Venkatramanaya haunts Indian administration. We have not been able to get over this problem. There's also a funny aside. Next slide. There's a funny paragraph. As I said, tribalism is not, let us not think that tribalism only is about Brahmins or upper caste or any. Tribalism is across the board. For example, this paragraph says, in the following years, the Board of Revenue reminded the collectors of this order which they also tried to enforce. Thus, in 1866-67, the Tirunelveli collector reported that in that district, the influences for evil of the native officials had grown far beyond his power to grapple with. The Board of Revenue ordered the surrounding collectors to assist him by arranging for transfers. In this case of the Pillais, a non-Brahmin upper caste with whom every office in the district was crowded. So it was not just the Nellore collectorate. In Tirunelveli, almost every employee was a Pillai. So my point is, I am not blaming Brahmins or Pillais here. I am saying any community, given the chance, will favor its own members and will discriminate against others. So government has to intervene. So unless government takes corrective measures, this is what is going to happen. I don't know, you might have heard of this. Sukhdev Thorat and Paul Atwell did a study in 2007 on caste discrimination in private sector. What they did was they sent identical resumes to several private sector companies in all sectors, IT, finance, manufacturing, and all over the country, just to see what happens. They waited to see how many of them got interview calls. Only the names are different, and the names revealed the caste of the person. They took care to make sure that the people had caste surnames. 67% of the applications of upper caste candidates got interview call. Only 33% of SC candidates applications got interview call, and with Muslims the percentage was even lower, 29%. Then they did one more experiment. They improved the resume of the SC candidates and they still found the SC candidates didn't get many more interview calls. It was still the upper caste candidates who got more interview calls. So what does this show? Of course, we can't generalize based on this one study. I wish most such studies had been done, but I think it fairly reflects the reality. So this study shows that caste identity and not merit dictated private sector hiring decisions. We all know that. There are informal caste networks and people say, this fellow is good, that fellow is good. This is how recruitments and promotions are done. Now, you would agree that the most exalted institution in any country is the Supreme Court. And you would expect that the judges of the Supreme Court at least should rise above tribalism. Now, if I can prove that even the judges of the Supreme Court, I'm giving the example of the US Supreme Court, I'll come to our Supreme Court in due course. If I can prove that if the judges of the Supreme Court are also not above tribalism, if they can't get over their narrow caste and other, loyalties and biases, then what hope do you have for lesser people? Now, if you look at the US Supreme Court, the USA became a republic in 1789. The Supreme Court of the USA has mostly been dominated by white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant males. Okay, the first Catholic judge was appointed only in 1835, 46 years later. The first Jewish judge was appointed in 1916. The first black judge, Thurgood Marshall, about whom a movie is there in Netflix, you should all see it, called Marshall, was appointed in 1967. The first woman judge was appointed in 1981. And the first Hispanic judge was appointed in 2009. It's ridiculous, But presently, there are 6 Catholics. Of course, there are 9 judges of the US Supreme Court. The same person can fit 2 or 3 labels. Presently, there are 6 Catholics, 1 Jewish, 2 blacks, 4 women, and 1 Hispanic judge of the US Supreme Court. What this shows is, even if you don't have reservation, you should make a noise. You should criticize. Every time, you find that a batch of judges, only upper caste judges is appointed, you should make a noise. People should criticize it. They should say this is wrong. Then the people will feel that the persons making the appointment should feel guilty about it. You should not let them get away with it. Now, how tribalism has affected the US Supreme Court's decision making. We know how tribalism is affecting the Indian Supreme Court's decision making. As I said, I'll come to it later. But look at the US Supreme Court. Why I'm saying is tribalism is a very powerful force and we need to come to terms with it. The first case is Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. The question was whether the Bill of Rights, which is the US equivalent of our fundamental rights, are applicable to the blacks or not. Can you believe it? The Supreme Court says, no, Bill of Rights is not applicable to blacks. And it even makes a remark that it calls the blacks a parade of horribles. Can you believe it? The Supreme Court calls the blacks, if you give them all kinds of rights, they will have meetings, they will attend dramas, we will have a parade of horribles. That's the term used by the Supreme Court. The next case is Pace versus Alabama, 1883. Many states, US states, had imposed ban on interracial marriages. Blacks can't marry whites or whites can't marry. Now you would expect the Supreme Court to strike it down. But in this case, Pace versus Alabama, the Supreme Court upheld it. And it was overturned only sometime in 1967, after so many years. Next, Plessy versus Ferguson. It's a famous case, 1896. This was about segregation of school students. Blacks went to one set of school students, whites went to another, students went to another. So somebody challenged it. The Supreme Court upheld this segregation and came up with an infamous argument, equal but separate. They said blacks and whites are equal. That doesn't mean they should mix. They can remain separate. That's what the Supreme Court said. Then Lochner versus New York, 1905. Supreme Court, when New York City reduced the number of work hours to 10 hours, the Supreme Court struck it down. You would think that the courts would be enlightened, but they were not. Buck versus Bell, 1927. It's an important, what is eugenics? Trying to improve the human race. People think Hitler was a horrible guy. He was. But Hitler got his ideas of all this from the USA. The USA was the first country to implement sterilization programs against people which he thought were inferior. Part of the inferior. So this case went to the US Supreme Court. The US Supreme Court by 8-1 judgment upheld it. And a famous judge called Oliver Wendell Holmes, he made a famous remark, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. That's what he said while upholding this judgment. Next is Korematsu versus United States, 1944. It's 44. During the World War II, US was at war with both Germany and Japan. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't put Germans in concentration camps, but he rounded up all the Japanese and put them in concentration camps. So one Japanese guy went to court saying, this is discrimination. Germany is also at war with us. Why are only the Japanese being interned? And the Supreme Court upheld this order also. The reason why I am giving all these examples is you cannot depend upon the Supreme Court or any court for that matter for justice in these matters. They are as much prone to tribalism as anybody else. Next. So India's highly inequitable development across castes in 12 slides. This is slightly dated 2019 figures, but the situation is still very much the same. As I said, the ghost of Venkataramanaya of Nellore still haunts the corridors of Indian government offices. In Government of India in 2019, it is still the same, let me assure you. Out of 89 secretary posts, 85 are upper caste, OBC 0, SC 1, ST 3. Additional secretaries out of 93, upper caste 82, OBC 0, SC 6, ST 5. Joint secretaries 275, upper caste 244, OBC 19, SC 13, ST 9. Now, I don't think things have changed much between 1853 in Nellore and today. Now, this is caste composition of corporate boards of India's top 1,000 listed companies. You will find that 92.7% of the directors on the boards of listed companies are from upper caste. Mostly about 46% Brahmins, 46% Baniyas. OBC is only 3.8%, SC and ST 3.5%. Even this only because of public sector. If public sector was not there, this also won't be there. Caste composition of High Court judges appointed between 2018 and 2022. You must have read about this. In the 5-year period, 79% of the High Court judges were upper caste. OBC was only 12%, SC 2.8%, ST 1.3%, minorities 2.6%, etc. Now let us not believe this bullshit argument that they were appointed on merit. As you know, there is no entrance test. There is no interview. The collegium is free to choose anybody it wants. And we've seen the kind of people the collegium has chosen. One recent case in Delhi, I don't have to tell you. No diversity in higher judiciary in India. No OBC or SC judge of the Supreme Court till 1980. The very first OBC and the very first SC judge were appointed after 30 years after India became a republic. You may say this is an improvement over the US Supreme Court, but still it is not good enough. And thereafter, the representation has been very token, just one guy or two guys like that. Only one ST judge of the Supreme Court was appointed. I thought no judge had been appointed, but then I found that one gentleman called H.K. Sema had been appointed between 2002 and 2009. 30 of the 33 Supreme Court judges are Hindus, one Muslim, one Christian, and one Parsi judge, no Sikh judge since 2017. Only 4.2% of the Supreme Court judges of all time are women. It's not as if you don't have outstanding women lawyers. Currently, only 13% of all High Court judges are women. Now, what does this show? That people are always comfortable with members of their own caste. And as you know, in judiciary, not only casteism is a problem, nepotism is a problem, serious problem. There was a news item in 2018 in Times of India which said, Allahabad High Court had sent proposals for some 80 candidates over 3 years. 16 candidates, the Chief Justice weeded out saying they're all case of nepotism. Government of India weeded out another 18 cases. Something with the proposal. So, nepotism and casteism are rampant in judicial appointments. Now, you would expect, at least in the lower courts, there'll be proper diversity. Now, you find scheduled tribe judges. All India scheduled tribe percentage is 8.6%, but actual scheduled tribe judges in place is in 4.9%. Look at Odisha, a state with a lot of scheduled tribe population. 22.8% of the population of Odisha is scheduled tribe, but not even one scheduled tribe judge is there, even in the lower court. It's ridiculous. Then Gujarat, 14.8% scheduled tribe population, only 0.4% representation of scheduled tribe in the lower judiciary is only 0.4%. Similarly, West Bengal, 5.8%. It was 0% till 2022. I think one person was appointed in 2022. So what this shows is, even though there are a lot of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in a state, these fellows are just not appointing them. Tamil Nadu, of course, has fulfilled its quota. Now, next, look at SC judges. The things are slightly better, but even there, West Bengal, in spite of having 23.5%, had 0 SC judges when this article was written. Odisha, in spite of having 17.1% SC population, had only 2.2% judges. This is the national income of caste groups above and below national average household income. You find Brahmins and the non-Brahmin upper caste incomes are well above the national average. The reason for the non-Brahmin upper caste being high is because of the baniyas, not because of this. And you find that the OBC, SC and ST, their incomes are well below the national average. Systematic exclusion in print, TV and digital media. Now, media is very important. Of course, now thanks to social media, a lot of guys, OBC, SC, ST guys are able to put their views on Twitter or YouTube and other Facebook and all that. But still, print and TV media are important. Leadership positions in the media, you find upper caste at 90%, no SC or ST individuals heading mainstream media. Authorship of articles in English and Hindi newspapers, upper caste 60%, OBC, SC, ST 20%. Newsroom leadership distribution. Out of 121 positions, upper caste 106, OBC 5, minority communities 6. Primetime debate anchors, out of 87 positions, upper caste 75%, no OBC, SC, ST. Primetime debate panelists, upper caste over 70%. So the media can shape the narrative. They can make it appear as if reservations are bad, as if reservations are appeasement, as if reservations are politically motivated. They keep trying to shape the narrative like that. Now, this is the data which I gathered when I was Secretary of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj in 2010 for a scheme called Kalaignar Veedu Valangum Thittam. The purpose of the scheme was to convert all mud-walled, mud-floor, thatched roof huts into concrete houses. We did a survey and we found that there are 22 lakhs such houses, mud-walled, thatched roof houses. Now you can be damn sure that the people living in these huts are very poor. I have put the photo of one such hut. That lady can't be rich. Now, a complaint you often hear, or a comment you often hear is there are so many poor in the upper class also. Now, yes, there are poor in the upper class also, but you must have a sense of proportion. You must know something about statistics. Now, if you look at this data, it shows that among the 22 lakh huts, upper caste share was only 0.7%. Whereas their population share, as you see from the other chart, is 2.8%. Their population share is 2.8%. Their hut share is 0.7%. Scheduled tribes, their population share is 0.6% or close to 1%. Hut share is 2.8%. SC, their population share is 23.7%. The huts are 31.2%. MBC, population share is 28.6%. Huts 41.5%. You find that the MBCs are quite badly off in Tamil Nadu. And BC, population share 45.4%, hut share is 23.8%. One reason why the SC's thing is comparatively better is because there has been a scheme for such house building for SCs for a long time, since 1970s. Indira Awas Yojana has been there. That's one of the reasons. Now, as this statement clearly shows two things, that the MBCs, are pretty badly off. Upper caste may be poor, but their number is negligible. This is the BR Caste Survey 2023. Just for academic illustration. There in BR you find that the Kayas, who are roughly the equivalent of Pillais here, they are more educated than the Brahmins. The Kayas are followed by Bhumihars, then the Brahmins. And you find some communities, their education level of measured by postgraduate or professional degree, engineering or law, is very less. For example, Yadavs, 0.82%, Nonia 0.22%, Malla 0.2%, Chamar 0.44%, Mushar 0.01%. So it shows that benefit of education in BR has not really reached all these communities. This is central universities. Reservation is there in central universities, but still you find that most of the posts of reserved for OBC, SC and ST have not been filled up. There is a hidden bias. What they do is they fix the qualifications in such a way that SC, ST and OBC candidates cannot fulfill. And then they will say no candidate found available, and after a few years they will de-reserve the posts. This is for research funding. You find that SC, ST, OBC candidates don't get much research funding. Most of it goes to upper caste candidates. Now, reservation pros and cons. Of course, all of you know this. I'll begin with the cons first. I'll begin with the arguments against reservation, because unless you consider the arguments against reservation, you can't speak for it. First, reservations go against meritocracy. This is a standard argument. Second, they hurt efficiency in government services and lower standards in education and professional fields. Third, they perpetuate caste division. This is one standard argument. But you know that caste blindness only favors the already entrenched. It only favors the privileged. Fourth, they are unfair to deserving candidates from non-reserved communities. 5, penalizing current generations for historical injustices is fair. People say, just because my grandfather or grandfather did something, why should I be penalized? This is one standard argument you hear. Next, they create a vested interest in backwardness. They could lead to brain drain and loss of top talent. The benefits of reservations are mostly cornered by the dominant communities among the reserved categories. Marginalized communities should get educational support, but admission and recruitment should be made on the basis of merit alone. Many half-baked fellows like our Narayana Murthy of Infosys, they have been making this suggestion, that you should not have reservations, but you should provide SC, ST, OBC students with all the facilities. Where is the money to provide all the facilities? You don't have, the government doesn't have the money. The government has, the money is there, but government's priorities are different. Candidates from various reserved categories may face stigma for getting admissions and jobs due to quotas rather than merit. They're facing stigma anyway. So better they get the admissions and face stigma than not get admissions and face stigma. Even Jawaharlal Nehru expressed concern that reservations could lower standards and create division. Whatever else you may praise Jawaharlal Nehru for his scientific temper, for his progressive views, for his championing of secularism, but in the matters of casteism and social justice, I would give him only 2 marks out of 10. He was actually against reservations. I don't know whether due to lack of, sensitization about the problems of the poor. He being born into a rich family and all that, or whatever it may be. I think he messed up this social justice scenario considerably. If you look at South Africa, Nelson Mandela became president in 1994 and brought in a lot of laws, to favor the blacks. In 30 years, you have 70% black judges in the South African Supreme Court. Look at the state of India after 77 years. That's because instead of Nehru, if somebody like, say, Ram Manohar Lohia had become Prime Minister, things might have been different. Now I'll give the arguments for reservation, but I will not give them myself. I'll give them through the words of some well-known people. Of course, I'll be annotating them. I'll be first quoting Chandraban Prasad, a well-known Dalit scholar. He says, I had doubts about this story, I checked up, it's correct. He says, after Lord Macaulay introduced the English medium education, in Madras Presidency, there used to be 2 grades. First class was 60% and above, second class was 45 to 60%. Now, many of the upper castes used to fail. So they petitioned the British governor in Madras Presidency to say 45% is too much for us, please introduce a third class with 33% pass. And the governor agreed, so a third class with 33% was introduced. And this is true, I'll show you the results. Now what Chandraban Prasad is saying is, you fellows who talk so much about merit nowadays, remember that your grandfathers or great-grandfathers could not pass when the pass mark was 45%. This is a report of the Indian Universities Commission. There's a thing which shows the percentage of pass marks. Now you may say that British times exams are much more strict. There wasn't any marks inflation of the kind you have today, where everybody gets 200 or 200 in most subjects. You find that the percentage of passes was, this is 1902. In Madras Presidency, it was only 19.2%. and other presidencies it is there. There's a remark at the bottom saying, this is the state of affairs even after we reduce the pass percentage to 33%. There's a remark there. Now, this data is given by Chandraban Prasad. He says, for example, in Calcutta University, Bachelor of Arts, for 20 years, he gives the statistics. You find in 20 years, there's not even a single first class, And second class, there are very few. Most of the people are third class. And in those days, as you know, only the upper classes were studying. So, Chandraban Prasad says, your great-great-grandfathers were an army of third classes. So, don't talk to us about merit. That's what his point is. Now, I already mentioned Shahu Maharaj of Kolhapur in passing. In fact, he was the real pioneer. I mean, if you leave out Sir Henry Pottinger, the British governor of Madras, the real pioneer was Shahu Maharaj. Now, he was, most of you know him as the person who sent Ambedkar abroad for higher studies, In 1902, he issued an order reserving 50% of the government jobs for backward classes. And he was also the first one to create a non-Brahmin priesthood. Imagine what we are taking pride doing now. He had done it in 1902. He promoted future leaders like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He prioritized education, set up student hostels, and Bal Gangadhar Tilak was, of course, a very conservative man. He criticized him strongly, and for the first time you find this word merit and efficiency and all being used. Bal Gangadhar Tilak criticized Shahu Maharaj for prioritizing caste over individual merit. It argued that the ruler of a state should be practically above caste or sectarian considerations. Also told you about Krishnaraja Wadeyar IV, Maharaja of Mysore. In 1918, he set up a committee under an ICS judge called Sir Leslie Miller to go into the issue of reservations for backward communities. The committee gave its report in 1919, and guess who was the Diwan of Mysore at that time? Visvesvaraya. And Visvesvaraya objected to the implementation of the committee's recommendations. Then the Maharaja said, okay, in that case, you please quit. And Visvesvaraya put in his papers. How many of you know this story? This story is completely hidden. And in fact, I would say that Shahu Maharaj and Mysore Maharaja should have got Bharat Ratna. Instead, Visvesvaraya gets Bharat Ratna in 1953. He's in the first batch of Bharat Ratnas. And this story that he was forced to resign because he opposed reservations for non-Brahmins is not told at all, is not mentioned at all. Now, this committee's report is very important because it made 2 or 3 recommendations which are still standing. First, it said it opposed caste-wise reservation. It said you should group castes. I mean, like the way some communities are asking. I mean, we want separate reservation for Marathas or 1 year or something. It said no. You can only if you start giving caste-wise reservations, things won't work. So we should group them into castes. That is the first point. Second, he said the committee did not recommend proportional representation. It used the word adequate representation, and that word has been carried forward to our constitution also. Third, it's a very important point regarding this reservation spoiling efficiency. The committee said efficiency is not to be measured solely or even mainly by academic qualifications, and it will not be denied that there are many important branches of administration in which other qualities such as sympathy, honesty of purpose, energy, and common sense go far as to make an efficient officer. I mean, this is what we all know. I mean, mere academic, the guys who are the toppers in IAS are not always the best IAS officers. The fact cannot be ignored. Another point is saying, the fact cannot be ignored that an officer making appointments and promotions finds it easier to see the values of his own community than those of others. Tribalism. He's saying, left to themselves, people will favor the members of their own community. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, I'm quoting in passing. This is what Ambedkar represented to the Simon Commission. Because it's quite interesting what he said in Simon Commission. Ambedkar says, Islington Commission 1915, the question was, how many Indians should be admitted to the public services? 9 years later, before the Lee Commission, the question was, what is the minimum number of Englishmen which must still be recruited? Ambedkar says, the same logic you please apply to Indians. The question should not be how many OBC, SC, ST should be admitted. The question should be how many upper caste should be retained. The argument that you made about the white Europeans, you apply to these guys. Gopal Krishna Gokhale had said, because the whites are dominating, it is stunting and dwarfing the Indian race. Ambedkar said, if the exclusion of the advanced communities was a moral wrong, then the exclusion of backward communities is equally a moral wrong that must be righted. I think it's very perfectly true. Ambedkar argued that competitive exams are fair only if everyone has had an equal chance to get an education, but in India this basic condition is absent. So the idea that backward classes can compete on an equal footing is a delusion. Of course, this is what we all say now. This is a very important point, he says. Officers who are drawn from a particular caste and in whose mind consciousness of caste sits closer than conscientious regard to public duty may easily prostitute their officers to the aggrandizement of their community and to the detriment of the general public. It's what we call tribalism. The European bureaucracy, efficient though it was condemned as it was found to be wanting in those qualities which make for human administration. The British were very efficient, but that time what we said, you may be efficient, but you are not sympathetic to Indian cause. Same argument applies now. Even assuming hypothetically that MPs from, let us say, West Bengal are the most competent. Can you have most of the MPs from West Bengal? You can't. You must have proportionate representation for all the states. Then the last fund of Ambedkar is also very good. He said, my view is that the disadvantages arising from the class bias of the officers belonging to Brahmin and allied castes has outweighed all the advantages attending upon their efficiency, and that on the total they have done more harm than good. The one remedy I see is a proper admixture of the different communities in the public service. This may perhaps import a small degree of inefficiency, but it will supply a most valuable corrective to the evils of class bias. I think it's perfectly correct. Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia is a person about whom not many people know. Of course, he was the guy who inspired Madhu Limaye, Lalu Yadav, Mulayam Yadav and all these people. He was a Bania from West Bengal. He was a PhD from Berlin University. He was a very scholarly man. I think, like Ambedkar, his contributions to Indian history have also been, neglected, glossed over, not adequately highlighted. Lohia was anti-Nehru. He felt that Nehru was not he was not genuine. And he says that he went to jail 26 times in independent India, more than what he did in his fight against the British. Now, some of Lohia's comments are very correct. All politics in the country, Congress, Communist or Socialist, has one big area of national agreement, whether by design or through custom, and that is to keep down and disenfranchise the Sudra and the women who constitute over 3/4 of the entire population. I think it is very true. Next he says, many socialists honestly but wrongly think that it is sufficient to strive for economic inequality and caste inequality will vanish of itself. As a consequence, they fail to comprehend economic inequality and caste inequality as twin demons which are both to be killed. He says caste restricts opportunity, restricted opportunity constricts ability, constricted ability further restricts opportunity. Where caste prevails, opportunity and ability are restricted to ever-narrowing circles of the people. Justice Chinnappa Reddy, many people don't know about him. See, the problem with the social justice movement is we don't honor our own heroes. You're not grateful to them. As I said, a Bharat Ratna should have been conferred on Shahu Maharaj. A Bharat Ratna should have been conferred on Krishna Raja Wadeyar. I would even say, if not a Bharat Ratna, at least a Padma Vibhushan should have been conferred on Justice Chinnappa Reddy. Bharat Ratna should have been conferred on Ram Manohar Lohia. Now, Justice Chinnappa Reddy studied in Loyola College, practiced in Madras High Court, was a judge of Madras High Court before he was elevated to Supreme Court, and he had his heart in the right place. First he says, using merit as the sole criterion in education and public employment would reinforce existing inequalities rather than correct them. We all know this. Social privilege and access to resources shape what we call merit. An inefficient but fair system is preferable to an efficient but deeply unjust one. He's quoting Ambedkar here. Caste, not poverty, should be the primary criterion of backwardness because wealth does not remove the stigma of caste discrimination. This is a counter to people who say we should have reservations only on the basis of economics. The 50% ceiling on total reservations is an unfair and arbitrary limit. There is nothing wrong in reservations being a political issue because in a democracy, every section of the society seeks representation. He says, what is wrong if people make it a political issue? The mere securing of high marks in an examination may not necessarily mark out a good administrator. An efficient administrator must be one who possesses, among other qualities, the capacity to understand with sympathy and therefore to tackle bravely the problems of a large segment of population constituting the weaker sections of the people, and who better than the ones belonging to those very sections. Now, so far I have been quoting only the Indian scholars and Indian luminaries. Let me quote a few foreign scholars. Bernard Williams is an English philosopher. He champions social justice and reservations with a famous example. This example was quoted by the Supreme Court in N.M. Thomas versus State of Kerala in 1975. What Bernard Williams says is, suppose that in a certain society, great prestige is attached to the members of a warrior class, the duties of which require great physical strength. This class has in the past been recruited from certain wealthy families only. But egalitarian reformers achieve a change in the rules by which warriors are recruited from all sections of the society on the result of a suitable competition. The effect of this, however, is that the wealthy families still provide virtually all the warriors. Because the rest of the populace is so undernourished by reason of poverty that their physical strength is inferior to that of the wealthy and well-nourished. The reformers protest that equality of opportunity has not really been achieved. The wealthy reply that in fact it has, and that the poor now have the opportunity of becoming warriors. It is just bad luck that their characteristics are such that they do not pass the test. We are not, they might say, excluding anyone for being poor. We exclude people for being weak, and it is unfortunate that those who are poor are also weak. The Supreme Court quoted this, but today the Supreme Court is singing a different tune. This is a Japanese judge called Kotaro Tanaka. He was the judge of the International Court of Justice. He says, the equality principle does not exclude the different treatment of persons from the consideration of the differences of factual circumstances such as sex, age, language, religion, economic condition, education, etc. To treat different matters equally in a mechanical way would be as unjust as to treat equal matters differently. To treat unequal matters differently according to their inequality is not only permitted but also required. So now we all know that meritocracy, some people think meritocracy means talent plus effort. But we know that meritocracy is not talent plus effort. It is talent plus effort plus investment. The money you put in coaching your child and other things, plus cultural capital, your starting point. Not all communities have the same starting point. Meritocracy is also becoming hereditary. I'll go through first. The Economist, it's also saying the same thing, that the meritocracy is now becoming hereditary. Now you all heard of Michael Sandel, a famous American philosopher, Harvard philosopher. He says in a book called The Tyranny of Merit, this is a counter to people like Narayana Murthy. He says, provide all facilities, don't have reservations. He says, I am thinking of the everyday ways that conscientious, well-to-do parents help their kids. Even the best, most inclusive educational system would be hard-pressed to equip students from poor backgrounds to compete on equal terms with children from families that bestow copious amounts of attention, resources, and connections. This is another American scholar from Yale University, Daniel Markowitz. Now, he says children from the richest 1/5 of the households, he's talking of US, roughly 7 times more likely than children from the poorest 1/5 to end up in the top quintile of income distribution, roughly 9 times more likely to end up in the top quintile of wealth distribution, quintile means 20%, roughly 12 times more likely to end up in the top quintile. Remember this, here, at least in US, it's only class. In India, we have an added element, caste. There is discrimination also. Now, the point is, what does science say? Now, philosophers right from Buddha to John Rawls and Bernard Williams have been saying all people are equal. But privately, most people think their community is superior to all others. The whites in the USA think they are superior to the blacks and the coloreds. The upper castes in India think they are superior to the lower castes. Men think they are superior to women. Now, what does science say about this? The ultimate, the evidence has to come from science. Now, as you all know, anatomically modern humans originated in Africa about 3 lakh years ago. And they came to India only about 70,000 to 1 lakh years ago. So all the religions have got it wrong. According to Christianity and Islam, the world was created about 6,000 years ago, in 4004 BC to be exact. That's wrong. And according to Hinduism, the world is very ancient. People, they talk of Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga and all lakhs of years. But actually, anatomically, modern humans have been in India only for the last 70,000 to 1 lakh years. Everybody here is a migrant. Some came earlier, some came later. So everybody is from a common origin. That's the first thing. Now, unfortunately, there are no scientific studies about caste. As you would expect, our fellows won't do any research which will show that everybody is equal. So we have to depend on scientific studies from USA and elsewhere. Now, there are a lot of scientific studies about racism, whether people belonging to different race groups are different or equal. And they all say that no, there's no difference. Genetically, there is no difference. There are minor differences. For example, the blacks may have wide nose, they may have dark skin, they may have curly hair. These have nothing to do with your intelligence or your any other ability. These are adaptations to the environment. Even the anatomically modern humans, when they first entered UK, Britain, about 10,000 years ago, they were colored. They were not white. Only later they became white. So the IQ disparities are not due to what? Genetics, they are due to environmental conditions. Okay. Now I will cite 8 studies which you should know, because you need to use these studies for arguments. First is a study by Richard Leventin's 1972. It's a famous study. What Richard Leventin said is 85% of human genetic variation exists within population groups and only 15% between groups. You take any 2 groups, whites versus blacks, Europeans versus Chinese, Tamils versus UP Walas, most of the differences are within the group, only very few differences are between groups. The Human Genome Project, you must have all heard of it. All the genes in the human body have been studied and listed out. The project took about 13 years. Now, the Human Genome Project says all humans share 99.9% of their DNA. The difference is only in the 0.1%. No gene or set of genes is unique to any social group. You can't say this gene will be found only in Jews, or this gene will be only in blacks, or this gene will be found only in Chinese. There's no gene. Every gene is available in everybody else. In every group to different numbers. Again, it confirms the earlier study. Genetic differences exist mostly within populations, not between them. It supports the out of Africa migration theory, confirms race is a social construct, supports anti-discrimination policies. Studies by the American Society of Human Genetics, these are multiple studies, reaffirmed that race is a social construct with no genetic basis. Racial groups share significant genetic overlap with more variation within groups than between them. The Leventin study, more. Genetic traits change gradually across geographic regions, a concept known as clinal variation. That is, there is no abrupt change. You find complexion or whatever changes gradually, No clear genetic boundaries between groups, and so no fixed racial categories. Now, this is an important study by 2 guys called Savage and Lee. Savage et al. And Lee et al. Genome-wide association study of intelligence. That is, in the genome, they see if somebody is intelligent, they see is there any genetic variant in common to all intelligent people. Or if somebody is very athletic, they see if there is any genetic variant common to all people good in athletics. That's called genome-wide association study. It doesn't mean causation, it is more of correlation. Now, what these studies have said is there is no such thing as an intelligence gene. There is no one intelligence gene. Many people think intelligence gene and all that. There is no one intelligence gene. Instead, thousands of genetic variants, each with a very small effect, contribute to intelligence and other cognitive abilities. Your intelligence is due to thousands of genes, not just one gene. And each of these 1,000 genes genetic variant contributes a little to your intelligence. For example, Savage et al. In 2018, he analyzed the data of over 269,000 people, nearly 270,000 people. He identified 1,016 genetic variants which he thought were associated with intelligence. But their combined impact was, they could explain only 7% of intelligence. He identified 1016 genes, genetic variants, but their combined predictive power was only 7%. Lee et al. In 2018 analyzed data of 1.1 million individuals. They identified some more, 1,271 genetic variants. Intelligence, he linked it with educational attainments, and he found that the combined predictive power was 11 to 13%. Lee also did one more study in 2021. This time he took 3 million individuals, analyzed their data. He found 4,000 genetic variants linked to educational attainments, and their combined power was 12 to 16%. Now, what is more interesting is the findings of these studies. First, intelligence is polygenic. Polygenic means caused by multiple genes and influenced by thousands of genetic variants, each with a very small effect. Second, environmental factors play a larger role than genetics in cognitive development. Most of these things we know, we have heard, but you should know which study actually said it first. There is no racial or group link to intelligence. All claims of inherent differences are scientifically unfounded. No one race or group is more intelligent than the other. Intelligence is malleable. It can be improved with suitable good nutrition when you are young, early schooling, good schooling. All this can improve your intelligence. This is a famous effect. You should know about it. The Flynn effect, discovered by James Flynn in 1984. What he found was there is a steady increase in IQ scores by about 3 points every decade in the 20th century, not just in USA but across the world. The rise in IQ scores is too rapid to be, as you know, genetic evolution is very slow. So what is this rise in IQ scores due to? It is only due to environmental factors. Environmental improvements like better education, improved nutrition, healthcare advancements, more exposure to media, computers, abstract thinking have led to better brain development and cognitive stimulation. It proves that intelligence is malleable. Richard E. Nisbet's Intelligence and How to Get It, he's done several studies, says the same thing almost. He refutes racial superiority claims. Nisbet says IQ differences are primarily shaped by environment, socioeconomic conditions, education, cultural influences rather than genetics. As you know, the Global Hunger Index says that India ranks 111 out of 124 countries, where most of the people are hungry. They don't have proper nutrition, proper education. How do you expect them to become intelligent? Wealthier families provide better education, nutrition, and intellectual stimulation, leading to higher IQ scores. IQ is malleable, investing in early education. So basically, the point here is intelligence is more due to environmental conditions than due to genetics. Bucharest Early Intervention Project. See, when this chap Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania was overthrown, there was a lot of turmoil in Romania, and a lot of children were, had no parent. They were admitted to orphanages. So they did a study on the effects of severe childhood neglect on IQ, brain development, and social behavior. Researchers tracked 136 orphanage-raised Romanian children. They took 136 children, assigned some of them to foster homes where people are willing to take them. Rest remained in the orphanages. They compared the IQs. They found that the IQ of orphanage-raised children was average was only 66, and those raised in foster homes was 103. Dutch winter hunger. So in 1944-45, Holland, Netherlands was under German occupation, and there was a severe hunger. Many people faced starvation. So this study did a unique experiment. It compared individuals exposed to famine in utero, meaning when they were pregnant, when they were in the womb, to those born before or after the famine. They found that individuals who were exposed to famine when they were in the womb had lower IQ and smaller brain size. All this shows that nutrition, all this is very important for intelligence. The poor people, the SCs, STs, OBCs, many of them may be poor. They may not have had good nutrition. During their mothers may not have had good nutrition during pregnancy. They may not have had good nutrition after birth and during their childhood. All these factors count for this. Now, as you know, there are 3 types of reservation next. First is electoral reservation. All of you know it. The constitution is a little confusing. For electoral reservation, it talks about proportional representation, proportion to the population. But for jobs reservation, it talks about adequate representation. Reservation in admission to education institutions doesn't say anything. It leaves it vague. Now, as you know, there is no reservation for Rajya Sabha and Legislative Council. There is a reservation only for Lok Sabha and State Legislative Assembly. SC, ST get reservations proportionate to their population. And this reservation was originally supposed to be only for 10 years from 1950. I don't know how Ambedkar agreed to it. Maybe he couldn't help it. But the SC, ST lobby has been, they should, because otherwise they will be nowhere. Because SCs are a minority in almost every constituency. So they will not have a single MP. Even STs may get a few MPs, but SCs will not have a single MP. So every now and then every 10 years they've been lobbying, and it's been extended for 80 years, up to 90, up to 2030. Now, after the 73rd and 74th amendments to local bodies, they introduced two articles, 243D1 and 243T1, where reservation has been introduced for SCs and ST in local bodies also, panchayats and municipalities. For the first time, in that 73rd and 74th amendment, reservations were introduced for OBC also. OBC reservation was introduced in 243D6 and 243T6. Why this is important? Because in Assembly and Lok Sabha, there is no reservation for OBC. But for the first time in local bodies, reservations were introduced for OBCs. But in local bodies, there is no mention of time limit. Nothing, no 10 years or anything. Now, this is why I found fault with Nehru. In 1951, he had a chance to conduct a proper census and see the economic status of all communities. But he did a census only of SC and ST. He left out OBCs and he left out all the upper caste. The reason he gave was OBC, SC and ST have reservations not only in education and employment, but also in electoral constituencies. So we have to enumerate them. But OBC also had reservations in many states in education and colleges. So that argument was not fully correct. Now, at least after 73rd and 74th amendment, when OBCs are also having reservations in electoral constituencies, obviously you should enumerate OBCs. So the 2001 census should have enumerated OBCs, but they didn't do it. This is clear mischief. And in 2010, all these parties joined together, they lobbied, and it was decided the 2011 census will enumerate OBCs. But even there, they didn't do the census through the census commissioner. They didn't do it under the Census Act. They did what's called a socio-economic census by the RDA and Urban Development Department. They did a mess of it. There are about 6,000 castes in India. These fellows came up with a ridiculous figure of 46 lakh castes. Reservations in public employment, all of you know this. 16.1 says everybody should be treated equal. 16.4 says nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provision for the reservation of appointments or posts in favor of any backward class of citizens which in the opinion of state is not adequately represented. The constitution is confusing. Here it uses the word backward class of citizens, and that term includes OBC, SC, ST. Why I mentioned just these two is there's a lot of history behind this. You must have all heard of this famous case called N.M. Balaji versus State of Mysore 1963, where the Supreme Court said reservation is an exception. Equality is the rule. The exception cannot expand to swallow the rule. So reservation can never exceed 50%. That was the Supreme Court's logic. The first time it was mentioned in N.M. Balaji versus State of Mysore in 1963. That is wrong logic. I'll tell you why. In the same year, there was one more case called T. Devadasan. There the Supreme Court held the same view, but Justice Subbarao, who later became CJ, he put a dissenting note. He said reservations, even if you didn't have 16.4, reservations are still possible under 16.1. What he said is, when you say people are equal, under Article 14 also people are equal, but Article 14 allows proper classifications to be made. For example, you can't say people who have scored above 80% and people who have scored below 40% should be treated equally. They're different. You can always treat them differently. So what Subbarao said is, Article 16.1 itself allows reasonable classification to be made. So 16.4 is only an emphatic restatement of what is already contained in 16.1. I'm sure many of you have heard of this thing called horizontal reservation. Reservation for disabled, reservation for women, reservation for a thing. Where do you think horizontal reservation comes from? It comes from 16.1. Horizontal reservation comes from 16.1. So if you agree with this logic, that is, reservation is not due to 16.4. 16.4 is not an exception. 16.4 is merely an emphatic restatement of what is already contained in 16.1. Then this 50% logic doesn't hold good. But you won't believe it, for 57 times, not once, not twice, not thrice, 57 times, the Supreme Court reiterated this 50% ceiling logic. They called it the Lakshman Rekha. They said it's the iron rule. On no account you can cross 50%. In some of the earlier judgments, they say even if you, by a constitution amendment, you try to bring it above 50%, we'll strike it down. Peri vartela vittite. When this 10% reservation for EWS came and the total reservations became 59.5%, the Supreme Court, ignoring all their previous judgments, upheld it. And that's what I said. This is a case of tribalism at work. 16.4a, reservation promotion for SC and ST with consequential seniority. 16.4b, carrying forward. 16.6, reservation for EWS, what was introduced now. Now, reservation for EWS would have been okay if it was for all communities, EWS of all economically weaker sections. But if they said EWS other than SC, ST and OBC, which means it is EWS among upper castes. That is ridiculous. Because the same Supreme Court in several judgments had said, unless you have proper empirical data, you can't implement reservations. There was no empirical data for what percentage of upper castes are there in India and what percentage of them were poor. But without that, whenever it comes to SC, ST, OBC, the Supreme Court would always strike down the reservation saying you don't have data. Show me the data, they'll say. But here they upheld it even though there was no data and even though it exceeded the 50% ceiling. Indira Sawhney versus Union of India, as you know, the famous Mandal judgment. I mean, why I'm saying this is the Supreme Court's bias. I'm sorry to say this, but it's the fact. The Supreme Court's bias against reservations for OBC, SC and ST, in spite of Ambedkar and all the great people saying what they did, is very apparent. The Supreme Court struck down reservations in promotion. It said no reservations in promotion. Then Parliament had to bring in Article 16.4a to overturn the judgment and bring in reservations for promotion, but only for SC and ST, not for OBC. And as you know, Tamil Nadu also brought in a law, and that Tamil Nadu 69% reservation was kept in the 9th schedule. The Mandal judgment also said total reservations, including carried forward vacancies, should not exceed 50% in any year. Already existing reservations were 49.5%. If 50% limit cannot be exceeded, you can't carry forward at all. So Parliament added Article 16.4b. Now this is an important judgment. Why I'm saying it's important is, this is the judgment where in 2006 Supreme Court said even if you bring in a constitutional amendment where the 50% limit is breached, we will strike it down. The Supreme Court said in M. Nagaraj versus Union of India that even if you bring in a constitutional amendment, there is the basic structure doctrine padi, all reservations, if you breach the 50% ceiling, if the creamy layer is not excluded and there is no quantitative data for establishing backwardness, then we'll strike it down. But in the EWS reservation, as you know, the 50% ceiling was breached and there was no quantitative data for this one, but the Supreme Court upheld it. The last is reservations in admissions to educational institutions. You all know that 15.1, 15.4. I put this last because 15.4 was not there earlier. I don't know, it's a great omission. I don't know even Ambedkar and all these people how they missed it. There was originally when the constitution came into being, there was a reservation only 16.4 was there. Reservation for in employment was there, but reservation in admissions was not there. So that famous Champakam Dorarajan case law, 1951, Supreme Court struck it down. Then the time Ambedkar was still the law minister, and they brought in, I think Periyar and others organized a massive agitation here, and then Article 15.4 was brought in for giving reservations in educational institutions also. Now many people may not know this. There's an Article 15.5 which provides for reservation even in private institutions. There is an amendment was brought in 2005, but அது அப்படியே implement பண்ணாமே வச்சிட்டிருக்கானுங்க நம்மளுங்க. So I'll conclude my talk by saying, giving 4 action plans. First, I am saying undertake caste census. This nonsense about caste census will hinder, harm India's unity and all this is absolute bull. Peter Drucker's famous saying, what gets measured gets monitored. Now, you can't monitor something without data. If you don't have data at all, how the hell can you monitor it? The problems of social groups that have been historically discriminated against, be it by caste, race, religion, gender, disability or whatever, cannot be resolved without taking the group identity account and collecting data group-wise. You can't solve the problem of gender without taking women's data. You can't solve the problems of physically handicapped people without taking their data. You can't solve the problem of racial groups without taking that data. So data edukama solve பண்றாங்கிறது is a nonsensical statement. India's census enumerates religion, language and region which are as divisive as caste, if not more. If you can, religion is divisive, language is divisive, region is divisive. அதை மட்டும் நீங்கள் சென்சஸில் எடுக்கிறீங்க, காஸ்ட் மட்டும் எப்படி டிவிசிவ் ஆகுது? தட்ஸ் நாட் கரெக்ட். அண்ட் எஸ்சியில் when you say SC, it is not one community. There are some 1,200 SC castes and 698 scheduled tribes. You are taking that, In fact, this is what I say, Nehru messed it up. Now, if you had proper caste data in 1951 census itself, then all these demands being made by various communities saying give us so much, 10% or 21% or 17% won't be there, because the data speaks for itself. You can say, hey, you guys are only 8%, how can you demand 10% or whatever? Availability of accurate caste-wise data would help curb arbitrary demands from caste groups and capricious decision making by governments. Government also playing politics. With data they can't do that. Now, as I already mentioned, once you introduced electoral reservation for OBC, you need caste data for OBC. So whenever some states like Karnataka or Madhya Pradesh or Maharashtra or Uttar Pradesh try to reserve for OBC in panchayats, local bodies, Supreme Court stayed it, saying where is the data? Now central government is not doing the census and gathering data for OBC, and Supreme Court just keeps staying it. So it is farcical to rely on 1931 census data for OBC reservation and zero empirical data for EWS reservation. This is the status today. We are doing EWS reservation without any data, and we are doing OBC reservation with 1931 data. So I am saying we have to introduce reservations in 3 sectors. Now you may think it is impractical. Now once you agree that all human beings are equal and there is nobody is innately superior or inferior, then you have to admit that whatever differences you see is because of discrimination, is because of tribalism. First I am saying is you must implement reservations in media, because this is the easiest to implement. Media are dependent on the government for advertisement. So you can always say that if you don't implement, we will not give. South Africa, for example, has done it. They said 30% black ownership required in private media companies, racial hiring quotas to ensure newsroom diversity, government advertising favors black-owned media outlets. We won't give you advertisements if you don't follow reservation. That's what South Africa has said. Brazil, incentives for private media to adopt voluntary hiring quotas. Next. Government grants for black-led media startups. Brazil is also doing the same thing. Even Canada, public and private media follow diversity hiring policies with targets for indigenous, black and racial minority journalists, special funding for indigenous and minority-owned media. And UK, the Ofcom, they monitor the diversity in programming. Recruitment programming you don't want the programs to favor, as you know, the leaders of the OBC, SC, ST are always underplayed or criticized. Now, Ambedkar or Lohia or something is never shown. So what is the action plan for India? Mandate diversity reporting. First thing is get report. Make them say, when you report how many people you are actually recruiting. Mere reporting will make them, you can ask questions. Second, link government's advertising funds to diversity hiring targets. Mandate boardroom quotas. Grant media fellowships to support SC, ST, OBC women. The media schools or journalism colleges are all very costly. The OBC, SC, ST people can't join that. So you have to give them fellowships to join. Monitor diversity in programming. My point is implement reservations in higher judiciary. You may think it is not possible. It has to be done. Because these guys will keep on striking down every other initiative. South Africa, if you see, 50% of the judges must be black. Any recruitment, 50% should be black. Today, 70% of the judges are black in the Supreme Court, High Court, everywhere. And remember, South Africa, the Mandela came only in 1994. 30 years plus சரி பண்ணிட்டாருங்க. நம்ம இத்தனை வருஷம் ஆச்சு, இன்னும் எப்படி இருக்கும்னு உங்களுக்கு தெரியும். Brazil, 30% reservation for black and indigenous candidates. So black and indigenous candidates are sufficiently represented in lower judiciary and high courts and all that, but Supreme Court la inno white domination konja irukku Brazil la. So what is the action plan for India? I am saying, see, first thing is you must always bring out a report, make them report that either Government of India or Supreme Court should bring out an annual national judicial diversity report for higher judiciary as well as subordinate judiciary. You bring out a report. See, this business of Odisha la, scheduled tribes 22% population but 0% representation even in subordinate judiciary is atrocious. Idu yaro monitor பண்றதா இப்படி நடக்காது. Mandate annual review of diversity in judicial appointments by Parliamentary Standing Committee. I remember Parliament reviewed this sometime in 2001 or something. After that, they are not doing it. They should do it every year. They should tell the judiciary, put it out in the public, that the judiciary is, appointing only upper caste people or only nepotists. Only these kind of fellows are getting, name and shame them. That's what you should do. Even if you don't introduce reservation, at least you should expose the data, make the data public. GOI should gently suggest to the Supreme Court Collegium to follow affirmative action and minimum representation of 50% for SC, ST, OBC and minorities in the collegium selection. In the mari 80% for upper caste la othukka mudiyadhu sollanum. Government of India should refuse to notify judicial appointments marred by conspicuous casteism and nepotism. Even now, Government of India is not notifying all the, some of the recommendations of the collegium. If they are not happy with the recommendation, they refuse to notify. They just sit on it. So, the Government of India should adopt the same policy. If you are not following reservations, if you are recommending only people of a particular type, if you are being nepotistic or casteist, we won't notify. Create an All India Judicial Service under Article 312. Article 312 talks about All India services. IAS, IFS, IPS, 3 services are there. IFS meaning Indian Forest Service. Now, Indian Judicial Service should be created. Once you create Indian Judicial Service, there will be reservation. Lot of OBC, SC எல்லாம் வரான். அது வரக்கூடாதுன்னு சொல்லி தான் இவன் பண்ணுறதே இல்லை. I remember I was speaking once to a former Supreme Court judge. He says, in every meeting of the judges, this is one of the subjects. This is always the last subject and nobody discusses it. அப்படியே அதை வச்சுறாங்க. Because they know that their interest will be affected. Then, if voluntary compliance fails, amend Articles 124 and 217. 124 is appointment of Supreme Court judges. 217 appointment of this one. Explicitly mandate reservations for SC, ST, OBC and minorities. Just bring out the amendment. Let's see. You must strike down pantu merit agde adu idu edo solluvan paapom. But at least bring it out. Let us do that. Last, implement reservations in the private sector. As I already said, people get pissed off not so much if they get lower ranks in a competitive exam. They don't mind that. They realize that the other person has genuinely got more marks, though they know that he is lucky or he has better coaching or whatever. People get pissed off that a more meritorious OBC, SC, ST candidate is overlooked in hiring or posting or in promotions to a less meritorious upper caste guy. This happens all the time. I've seen it happen in Tamil Nadu government when I was a member. All kinds of mediocre guys, I don't want to name who did it and to whom they did it. But so people get pissed off more by this. You get pissed off when you are not given bank loans or you are not given housing or things like this. So what I'm saying is whether you do reservation pandringlo illio, this you should bring in. A law like Prevention of Discrimination in Hiring and in the Workplace Act should be enacted to ensure that less meritorious UC upper caste candidates are not favored over more meritorious SC, ST, OBC and minority and women candidates. That is, somebody should be able to complain that, look, I did better, my annual records are better, but this fellow has been overlooked and he has got promotion. At least bhayam irukum. Even if, Now, South Africa, if you look at it, private companies with over 50 employees, they are forced to, they are given targets in hiring, ownership and board representation, not only in managerial positions, but also board of directors for blacks, women and disabled. They have given targets. If the companies don't do it, they won't get government contracts, they won't get tax benefits, they won't get business licenses. So government has so much hold on the companies. You can say, we won't give you a bank loan, we won't give you government contract, we won't do you unless you follow this. Outcome, increased black representation in managerial and board positions, boosted black entrepreneurship. Brazil. Companies must prove diverse hiring practices to secure federal contracts. If you are not following reservation in even private companies, you won't get government contracts. They are also giving tax incentives, but they are mandating public disclosure. As I said, again and again, the same point comes up. Mandate public disclosure. Malaysia, the Bhumi Putras, the Chinese and Indians, they were dominating the whole thing there. So they introduced a reservation for the locals, the Bhumi Putras, they were called indigenous things. So Malaysia, they said, even in private companies, 30% ownership should be with the Bhumi Putras, and employment preferences should be given to locals. So what should India do? Mandate diversity reporting for firms with, I'm saying not more than 50 employees as in South Africa, at least more than 500 employees. Engage industry leaders and associations to push voluntary. அவனை கூப்பிட்டு சொல்லுங்க, அவன் டெஃபினட்டாக திருந்த மாட்டான், பட் கூப்பிட்டு சொல்லணும். Link government contracts, subsidies and tax benefits to diversity hiring. That is, unless you show this much of SC, ST, OBC minority representation in your managerial positions and board employees, we will not give you contracts and will not give you licenses, things like that. The government can do it. Advise earmarking at least 33% of CSR funds for these groups. If incentivization doesn't work within 10 years, legally mandate at least 33% representation for SC, ST, OBC in managerial positions, and at least one SC, ST and 2 OBC directors on boards of listed companies. I'm being very liberal. I'm saying only at least one SC, ST and 2 OBC directors on the board of directors. 33% reservation for managerial. Idu panni aganum. Already, as I said, Constitution Amendment panni, Article 15(5) allows you to implement reservations in private unaided colleges. And it has been upheld by the Supreme Court also. So it can be done, but the thing is, nobody is even making the demand, and people who are happy. So I am quite unhappy with the OBC, SC, ST leaders also. They are not making the right noises, I feel, and they are not pushing in the right direction. And there can be no better example than Tamil Nadu to say that why social justice is necessary. I keep giving this example. In 1961, Tamil Nadu was one of the poorest states in India, in the bottom half of the country, just above Bihar. Bihar was the poorest then. 60 years later, Bihar is still the poorest. Tamil Nadu is in the top 3 in all parameters. What is this due to? It's only due to social justice and all communities coming up, not just the elites. The elites of Bihar, let me tell you, they are very good. In the IAS every year, more guys get in from Bihar than from Tamil Nadu. The elites have enjoyed all the fruits of development, but in Tamil Nadu, all communities have enjoyed the fruits of development. That's how, and Tamil Nadu is a better example. Thank you.
உன் கடவுளை விட, உன் சாஸ்திரத்தை விட, உன் முன்னோரை விட, உன் வெங்காயம் வழக்கமாத்தை விட, உன் அறிவு பெருசு, அதை சிந்தி.